In terms of designing an aircraft,
Mhm.
how hard is it to adapt it for hot weather conditions?
So, as a pilot and also as an engineer, cold weather is always far better for performance than hot weather.
Yeah.
Yes, far, far better. Now, there's a caveat to that. In an eVTOL, you have batteries. So you don't want your batteries frozen because they will not have their efficiency. But from an aerodynamic performance perspective, cold weather is always much, much better than warm weather. Um, a, a, a a propeller is all a propeller is a wing in itself. If you were to look at the cross section of a propeller, it's going to be a an airfoil just like a wing with twist and different angles of attack as it goes down the from the root out to the end of the propeller. But that thing spinning through the air is doing the exact same thing as a wing flying through the air. It's just doing it in a rotational sense, but it's creating a high and low pressure, which is what's giving you your force, and that's what's causing it to lift. And when you get at higher altitudes or higher temperatures, the air is not as dense. So that airfoil does not produce as much lift because there's just not enough air molecules to interact with the actual propeller. And it's the same thing with engines as well. Like a jet engine does not produce the same thrust up at altitude, but the caveat to that is when you're at a higher altitude, your drag is a lot less as well. So you want to fly aircraft high, but taking off and landing, which is what these eVTOLs are constantly going to be doing, in at high altitudes and at high temperatures, which the temperature increases the density altitude. We've got in aviation, you have a thing called a standard day, and that would be everything is based off at sea level at 15 degrees centigrade, and I think I should know it. I'm almost positive it's 15 degrees centigrade, but that's like the standard that you do all of your performance specifications to that particular standard. And then you have degradation as you either get higher in altitude because the air is less dense than it is at sea level. So, and it's the same thing with temperature. As you start climbing in, if you start raising the temperature, then for all intents and purposes, the airplane actually thinks it's at 4,000 feet as opposed to sea level. Like you could have a really, really hot, humid day in Savannah and or down on the coast in Florida. Like it'd be 110 degree or 105 degrees and really, really high humidity. And that's going to cause the air to be just a lot less dense. And then that's going to, the airplane will then think, oh, I'm at 4,000 feet or I'm at 5,000 feet. And when you're flying, actually, that's information that's very pertinent. If you're flying on a really hot day, when you fly into an airport, they tell you what the density altitude is because you want to prepare for that when you're coming into land. Otherwise, because the airplane will have different performance characteristics at higher altitudes. So to sum that up, the fact that they're demonstrating at 110 degrees, and not only is it 110 degrees, it may be 110 degrees, 15 feet up where they're making their measurement. If they're on a tarmac that's got blacktop and all the heat is radiating in that local area, it could be 120 to 130 to 140 degrees. It could be extremely hot. So demonstrating the fact that Joby demonstrated that they could take off vertically and they did convert, right? They converted and came back and landed.
I am pretty sure they did. I'll have to jump into that. I know it
Yep.
was piloted, but did they convert?
Yeah. That's a very important performance characteristic to say, look, and we're going to start seeing this between these two competitors, between Joby and Archer. Like Archer, I think also took their airplane over and they just lifted off hovered, and then came back down again. Like, if they do it at 9 o'clock in the morning and they do it at 3 in the afternoon, it's a huge difference. It could be it could be an enormous difference. So
I just want to jump in there and say it was a full transition they achieved.
Yeah. So, and not only so that trend, that hover transition, but then also, or that hover profile of the flight, and then converting. Also, the wing will not produce as much lift in a higher temperature environment. So the only way you counteract that is you have a higher angle of attack, or you have to go fast.
And does that put more stress on, say, the engine or the battery?
It would just require more power. They would have to. You're just going to supplement that with the power and what the rotors are going to have to do. So yeah, it will be. And again, everything in aerospace is margin. You never take off at 100% margin, or right at 100%, and you don't take the airframe to 100%. You test it to it, but you never take it to it. Because that's where you start getting into things called factor of safety. And you don't want to break the airplane. You don't want to overstress a motor. It can do it. And in an emergency situation, you will do it. So right now, down when they're doing, Joby's doing their testing right on the coast, cooler temperatures because they're right on the ocean. They may, hopefully, it's only requiring, say, maybe 70% of their motor capability, but I'll just throw that out there. Let's say it's 70% of their motor capability to hover. If you go to a higher altitude and a higher temperature, or just a higher temperature, you'll see it may require 80 to 85%, or it's going to be a higher amount of power. But I suspect Joby has already tested all of this out because they're testing at Edwards Air Force Base. And Edwards Air Force Base is the high desert of California. It's something like 4,000 feet or something. I'll look and see what Edwards elevation is. But that to go back to aviation history, and sorry, I'm going to nerd out for a second, but if you go back 20 years when Lockheed Martin and Boeing were competing for the Joint Strike Fighter program, and the Joint Strike Fighter, one of their aircraft had to take off vertically and then convert, similar to what these aircraft do now, but in a completely different powertrain. It's all based off turbines and whatnot. But Lockheed demonstrated theirs in the high desert of California on a hot day, and Boeing went all the way to Patuxent River, Maryland, which is right at sea level. And you could see in that because we were aerospace engineers, were following this competition very, very closely, because it was to win that contract, and it was billions of dollars were on the line. So in that time, like when Lockheed did their hover and then converted and flew, they did it in Palmdale, California, as where Boeing went and they took parts of the aircraft off. Even like they were removing doors and like getting as much weight off the airplane as possible, just so that they could do their hover test, or those were observations, at least at the time. So
Boeing have been doing that for a while then.
I'm sorry?
Boeing have been doing that for a while. I think there was a big scandal coming out.
Yeah, I mean, in the world of aerospace, the military has had a hovering aircraft for a long time. The Harrier, obviously, which was designed by the English. So, shout out to you, Reece. The Harrier was originally designed in the 1960s, and all that is it's just a big jet engine, but they're diverting the thrust in these channels these louvers that could move on the side of the airplane. I won't get into the mud of the pros and cons of that design challenge, but the the Harrier was a very successful military platform for many, many years. And eventually Boeing bought the rights to it and modified it. And the U.S. Marine Corps has used it. It's pretty much a very integral part of the United States Marine Corps' aviation platform. So when the Joint Strike Fighter came along, that program came along, Boeing adopted a very, very similar propulsion system as where Lockheed had a completely different propulsion system. They had a standard jet engine that would articulate in the back and point the thrust in the back of the airplane. And then it has a lift fan in the forward section with a big shaft that goes to that lift fan. And these doors open up and it creates, and from an aerospace perspective, there was a lot of advantages to Lockheed's design. And so we knew there was a lot of there wasn't much surprise when Lockheed did win that contract. But to that point, and I'm sorry that I've probably taken 20 mintes to just
No, you're fine.
where I could have just
I'm interested.
where I could have just said yes, temperature matters.
That's what we did.
Temperature certainly matters. Yeah.